Ah, hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Cognitively CRE. Hey, we got truly an amazing show today. I'm incredibly excited to be hosting a show like today. Thank you very much for joining us live, if you have the opportunity to join us live, and also thank you for watching us on the recorded session, for those of you doing so. For those of you that are on the YouTube stream, if you have any comments or questions, you can post those into the comments and we will see them in real time as we move forward. A little bit about me, James Waddell. I am with Cognitive Corp and will be the host today. Today's show, and really all of our shows at Cognitively CRE, are really meant to help the corporate real estate executive folks, that group, have a much better understanding of what their peers are dealing with, and to be a focal point to be able to reflect upon what's happening in the industry. Really cut through a lot of the noise and to have some very meaningful insights, conversations, and experiences as it relates to what's happening in the world of corporate real estate with a technology focus. So in today's show, we're going to peel that onion a little bit, have a much deeper insight conversation around what's happening today in the world of corporate real estate as it relates to technology and technology-enabled experiences. And we're going to have some amazing conversation as it relates to some newer technologies that are being deployed in order to meet the current demands of corporate real estate enterprise executives as it relates to experience. With that, I would like to introduce our co-host today, Phil Kirshner. Hello, Phil.
Hello, James.
And Phil, for everyone to get a sense for who you are, I obviously know you very well. I have a question for you, sir.
Sure.
So in a general sense, to help the audience get to know you a little better, what is your superpower, sir?
Favorite question coming from my tenure at WeWork. So thank you for that. I'd say, generally speaking, my superpower is inspiring other people to change with data. And that has been applied over a couple different disciplines over my career, starting in technology and then finance. But I fell into workplace strategy by accident about a decade ago and have built a career off of that, helping large organizations see that there is a different way that they can occupy space and that real estate can move as fast as their business wants, which has become all the more important to consider in what we're learning through the great COVID experiment.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And we'll be right back. And now let me introduce Mr. Alan Nee. Same question. Thank you for being able to join us, Phil and Alan. Alan, same question for you, sir. A little bit about your background. What is your superpower?
Great. Awesome question. I probably think my superpower, at least what I've been good at, and that's kind of helped me in my career, is really taking some pretty technical, technology-related solutions, protocols, et cetera, and really dumbing it down. And, even the last 2-3 years, I was actually in a marketing role leading all vertical and solutions marketing at Aruba. And a lot of the stuff that my team was doing is really distilling, all the technical mumbo jumbo, take it from the engineers that really revere and really appreciate the bits and bytes, but really kind of dumb it down, make it a lot more applicable to non-technologists.
Awesome. Give it that. So let me pull up our first slide here. So I was thinking about change and a lot of the things that's occurring in our marketplace and a lot of the unknowns, and it can be a little bit bewildering, if not overwhelming, as to what's happening. I see in the industry a lot of my peers in the professional services world trying to do more of the same that they have in the past, in the hopes that something changes in the world and it's able to fit what they've always done. But I think change is constant. I think there's been somewhat of a tectonic shift in the world today, which certainly has an impact on corporate real estate. But I don't think the chasm is huge. And I think that's one of the key topics that we want to address today is, what are we seeing in terms of change? Is it really overwhelming where everything is going to be reinvented? And or is it smaller incremental changes where perhaps we can repurpose a few things and plug it into the way that the world is today? I love this book, by the way. I think it fits perfectly. Who Moved My Cheese? And at the end of the day, change is constant. And if we're not keeping, if we're staying in the same place and we're not keeping in mind that change is constant, sometimes as Ferris Bueller said, the world can just pass us by. And I think that's the message I would like to leave everyone. And of course, we always finish with that question for the audit for the co-presenters and everyone on the call today. It's what do you want to leave with? My thought would be change is constant, but it's always to be on the lookout for what the next thing is. Don't necessarily kind of stay where you are, but look around for the trends that are real. And that's one of the things that we hope to make you aware of on these events. So with that, I would open up a little bit of the question for you, Alan, and you, Phil. What are you seeing in terms of change that's occurring in the marketplace from your respective roles?
I guess
Alan, I'd ask you to go first. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So first things first. I found myself writing a couple weeks ago that the future of the workplace, or I still believe pretty firmly, even despite everything that we're learning now in the pandemic, the future of the workplace is still now what I would have said it was 5 or 10 years ago. The trajectory hasn't changed. We've just accelerated, gone to bed and woken up 5 to 7 years later, especially in terms of organizational acceptance of remote and distributed working. Of course, this wasn't something anyone asked for, but yet here we are. And already, and I know I was at JLL years ago running the workplace consultancy in the Northeast, and JLL surveys heads of real estate every year asking about their changing kind of prioritizations and things that are on their mind. And right when I joined, I remember the results came out from the survey pointing out really how over the last couple of years, the focus for them had gone from the core, real estate as an asset, the building itself, into the design and delivery of a better interior, workplace, and eventually on to sort of how agile the portfolio was and ultimately the experience of the employee. The building is always the most important, and cost efficiency was always the most important. And when we'd ask, is this still important? The levels have been very consistent over the years, but it was that emphasis on change and workplace and experience that they were expecting to skyrocket over the next sort of 3 years and beyond. And for someone who grew up in facilities management or transactions or design and construction, that prospect of receiving an email from the C-suite saying, I have a talent problem, fix it, is really terrifying, I think. And that was a real wake-up call. And again, that was before this moment, where it's even ever more pressing, and more of my real estate workplace experience colleagues and friends have said their access exposure to the C-suite in this moment has been higher than it ever has been, which I think is indicative of the coming additional pressures that will be placed on that organization to deliver the changes, not just for cost, but for talent.
That brings up a couple of questions actually in my mind. The C-suite, are they, I would imagine that they're interested in business recovery thinking right now, right? In terms of what's going on in the workplace, what's happening in the workplace. How do we facilitate less risk as we look at plans to bring folks back to work and back into the office? Phil, I'm going to put you on the limb a little bit and ask you this question. Does the C-suite, meaning have the right access, the right talent, the right type of corporate structure from a corporate real estate perspective to really answer a lot of the questions that are being asked today, specific to that question around risk management in bringing people back? But then I would also say a lot of that might be technology enabled. And if it is, does corporate real estate have the right makeup, the right structure to be able to bring those types of notions into the right conversations? Yeah,
I guess kind of going backwards, I'll never forget a couple of years ago, I was at an industry meeting, and a head of corporate real estate and corporate services from a very large consumer products company said that over the last couple of years, within the real estate team, their hiring pattern was already starting to shift dramatically towards people with basically no real estate experience, but technology background, as opposed to just hiring traditional real estate expertise, because he could see ahead to delivery not only of the employee experience that was necessary, but James, to your point, the resiliency and recovery. It is becoming increasingly a data problem more than anything else, especially with a web of different applications and service providers in the mix. And so trying to create a a meaningful talent, career path for someone who's more technically oriented in the real estate world was really, really important. But I think it's historically been very hard. I remember that at Credit Suisse, actually, I was a campus recruit there years ago into the technology organization. But once I was in the real estate org, I realized there were major talent pipelines like into technology, major talent pipelines into banking and trading, the traditional sort of analyst and associate programs, and even a pretty robust one into finance holistically. But those programs were targeting, on the finance side, it's like accounting and tax and compliance. But real estate was, at least then, feeling a little stuck in the middle. So I think you're right. Like, there's a huge challenge and opportunity for real estate to have a much stronger seat at the table, and it's going to take a completely different talent pipeline. But real estate isn't the group that you usually see advertised. It's like, come here for the next hot opportunity for your career to really make meaningful change for an organization, especially for like younger joiners, looking to start their career. Yeah.
Alan, let me kind of move to you and put you on the spot a little bit. Historically, IT has been very disruptive in a good way. So probably poor choice of words, to the corporate structure, right? I date back to when there was a phone company, a hardline telephone company, kind of where I started my career. But we saw IT take over telephony. We saw IT moving into the AV world. And it seems like, based on much of our research, the cognitive research, that technology is being seen as a significant gateway to help us get back to work, back into the office, to recover and define the new type of work that's being done. So in that context, I would ask you, what are you seeing from your world, from your conversations with folks as it relates to change? And maybe even a follow-up question already would be, what's Aruba doing maybe to pivot on that a little bit?
Yeah, no, that's a great question here. Yeah, so they kind of just comment a little bit on some of the points that Phil covered a little bit. I think a lot of the change that we're seeing in COVID is not brand new, right? There's been already a lot of movement over the past several years, 5 years, 10 years, in terms of workplaces becoming a lot less static, right? In the past, you just needed to know how many people, how many square feet, that's how many desks, how many chairs you bought. You're done. That's your workplace strategy for the most part, right? And maybe you have a few amenity spaces. But with activity-based work, a lot of organizations wanting to be a lot more innovative, recruit, attract more talent, you need more dynamic spaces. And to be able to manage those spaces, we need to monitor it. And hence, technology started to come into play and the need for technology. I think we've seen a lot of organizations from an organizational standpoint starting to reorganize themselves to try to bring in more technical know-how within the facilities and real estate world. And that could either be through consultants or in some cases, organizationally aligning, the IT teams to support the line of business. So in the past, as Phil mentioned, maybe you had a IT team that supported a trading function or some other finance function. Now you're seeing more and more support kind of the corporate real estate sort of function from that perspective. So yeah, we've been seeing a lot of great change there. And I think it's actually two-way. It's not just IT pushing corporate services and real estate, but oftentimes it's the other way around, because you mentioned about telephony and other things within the enterprise technology world. Those are all things that other parts of IT are really able to kind of help progress, and they all are kind of under the same umbrella. Whereas corporate real estate is kind of more of an OT function, if you think about it. And you see this in industrial settings as well too, where IT and OT are still pretty distinct. There is a chasm that's starting to be crossed, and for some of the more progressive organizations, you're starting to see some good partnership there. From Aruba perspective, being our core competency, our core buyer is still the enterprise IT buyer, whether it's in the networking space, et cetera. With things like COVID or even prior to COVID, we're seeing we're no longer just speaking to enterprise or networking folks at the table. Very oftentimes we're seeing the line of business partner, such as a real estate individual or someone on the OT side showing up ahead. And with respect to COVID, we've had a huge call from our customers and the organizations to say, hey, can you help assist with your technology to help us get back to work? And in some of the most fruitful conversations, it's been both the line of business function being, real estate or HR combined with our typical sort of buyer, which is the enterprise IT buyer at the table, to kind of help formulate and provide some solutions to be able to assist for a more quick and safe return to work scenario.
Yeah, it's an interesting world, and in fact that I think we did speak on it in our last Cognitively CRE, that the fact that so many trends are accelerating. And I think ultimately that's really what's driving a lot of the significant change that we see. To that end, I found some very interesting slides, the sourced from Gartner in their Future of Work Trends post-COVID-19, that I thought really summed up a lot of the thinking that we've been seeing from corporate real estate executives. We all know remote work is going to go up, and it's here to stay. It's, in my opinion, a successful world's largest experiment, as it's been called. And I think we like it, but I do think there's some things that are lacking, which is why I think this 48% roughly of people spending their time working from home versus in the office feels about right to me. Trends around employee data and being able to look at that data have certainly accelerated. And by look at that data, I mean not necessarily, and I certainly hope not anyway, of looking down to the individual level to count the number of emails that are being sent and in attempting to measure productivity in that way, but more in how technology is being implemented, the type of modal work that's being done, and do they have, as a company, the right type of technology deployed? So what can be done there to optimize it? And when we think about returning to work and going to the office versus working from home, there's probably going to be a different type of work, modal work, that's mostly done in the office. And then the question becomes, do I have the right kind of spaces and the right kind of training and change management for those people in those spaces in order to be successful? So I think that's all driven by what we're considering here, employee data. The other trend that really think to keep in mind is that organizational resiliency. And I think globally, everyone, it seems, had an exceptional organizational resiliency plan to have a continuum of work, ability to continue work in a crisis environment. But I think that's really changed now from a definition perspective. So resiliency in a post-COVID world means, how do I keep my office open? Is there a way to keep the office open without having to shut down in a next pandemic-like environment? And then, there's a conversation out there related to contingent workers and what that means. And there's always been a trend around bringing in the right subject matter expertise when it's needed, and then releasing that work and allow those contingent workers to move on to help others. And that way, you are having the right mix of agile staffing for your organization when it's needed. I think that trend has certainly been accelerated as well. When I look at that whole piece, though, really where my mind goes is, from a workplace perspective, everyone's now a visitor. There's no sort of permanent occupant in an office when we think of these pieces. And that's just a premise, it's a thought that I thought we might discuss. But Phil, my first question would go to you. Agile desking was a trend prior to COVID. What's the thoughts? What's the thinking as it relates to the post-COVID world and from a work environment perspective?
Yeah, I remember, thanks. So I cover the world of doing, as you said, like agile workplace or smart workplace, shared desking, hot desking, some version of people sharing things in the office. And the largest, most successful versions of those programs at the corporate level around the world, in financial services and in healthcare and insurance firms, usually are based off of the principle that not everyone's around. So utilization is low on a daily basis, but at the same time, the experience is suboptimal, either for not having the right spaces or the right technology, or employees wanting new and more diverse services. So let's try to solve both by, you agree to share with me and I agree to give you something you didn't have before and you wanted, which could be better meeting room technology or free bananas. But those programs were very successful often by not asking people to change their patterns in terms of when and why they come to the office. It's just taking advantage of the naturally occurring daily vacancy, and was already putting companies down a path of providing an office that is more built for the group and for diversity and autonomy of activity than for supporting the individual just coming in and being completely static where they are. And so we're at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, obviously, with huge panic around health and hygiene and people getting sick in the office. There were lots of articles, as there had been years ago, about the open office being dead, all of a sudden saying, like, sharing will never happen again. A lot of people, I think, who had not been involved hands-on with the delivery of those kinds of mobility programs, just assuming like, aha, I win. I never have to give up my cubicle or I get my office back. How could we possibly sustain a program like that in a world with a major virus going around? But I actually think the opposite is true, that companies who have experimented with new ways of working in the office involving any kind of sharing, no matter what scale, hands down, like those real estate leaders and workplace experience leaders that I've worked with, or have been former clients and friends, all have experience with something that companies with more traditional workplaces don't, or a few things. One, it's like the concept of utilization, which is surprisingly difficult to understand for a lot of people, both like the difference between daily show up rates at a building level and how workspaces are used, and the difference between active occupancy when somebody is there and passive occupancy when they may be in the building but no longer at their workspace. They come to understand that, and even more importantly, being able to socialize what utilization data means, like with their leadership, the patterns and profiles of their employees. They're probably more accustomed to surveying. They're also more accustomed to the role of norms and house rules, and have at least some muscle memory for telling both the general employee base and leaders, this is how you are supposed to behave in this workplace because we've changed the rules. We share this now, and these technologies are used differently. So anyone who's got that muscle memory, it's really not that difficult to think, James, to your earlier point, like we're making minor changes and not major changes. Like I have to amend the rules slightly about maybe where you can be or how long you can be somewhere or how often something is cleaned or what your responsibility is. I'm going to look even more carefully at utilization data than I ever did before to make sure that maybe there aren't too many people in a space instead of just like there aren't enough. And that the employees are sort of accustomed to being nudged or attentive to understanding that workplace behavior matters. And a company that is coming from traditional desks and offices and a science space and has never even wandered down that path, I believe is going to have a much harder time digesting and investigating those kind of concepts now as they feel more pressure to have a more distributed and also safer workplace.
Excellent insights. You know, that leads me to think about change management. And I know that's been a difficult thing across the board. Anytime there's a change in the workplace, what's the thought, Phil, on change management? Are we prepared at a global level, just generally, that we're able to handle this type of change management? Or is there somewhat of a little bit of a skill gap there or a process gap?
Yeah, I do think it's a little bit of a gap, and my colleagues and I at WeWork were much more in favor of the term change mindset as opposed to change management, because traditional, more static corporate real estate, I move you from office A to office B, and maybe you used to have a giant cubicle over here and now you have something different over here, and maybe we're going more paperless, or maybe you're getting a new email system, or for Al, a new Wi-Fi, a new like applications. That change management implies like I'm helping you go from A to B. But with the pace of change in industry and technology in particular ever accelerating, and now real estate slowly catching up in how fast things will change, especially if employers continue to offer almost daily autonomy to their employees or contractors to decide like when and how their work gets done. If you're going to get into that kind of a flywheel of change, especially from a leadership perspective, it's no longer like, can I help you get from A to B? It's like, do you know how to operate and how to lead and manage and be aware of people's involving engagement with your team, with the company, and their productivity and everything else rapidly. So as we said, again, it's not just about manage from A to B, but are you learning to operate in a world where the change is constant, even for our physical environment, which we probably never thought would move that quickly?
Yeah, it's amazing. There's so much to unpack there, and I'm going to try not to get too deep, or we'll never hop off this call. But so going over to you, Alan, for a second, this notion of giving lots of autonomy to the workers, and that really falls into the messaging that we strongly believe in Cognitive. It's the autonomous workplace and how the workplace can adapt as it needs to, with very minimal input from the occupant experience perspective. When I tie that in and I think about employee data and data-driven decisions and how I'm going to get this data, and everybody coming in and now they're more or less a visitor in the space, potentially, what impact does that have on the infrastructure? And have you guys over at Aruba been thinking about this?
Yeah, we've actually been thinking about it for quite some time, and we've been putting the foundation in. This is just a new use case, right? But it all relies on the same sort of foundational element, right? As I think one of the things that Phil alluded to, right? We've been, and a lot of the more forward-thinking organizations have been going to kind of more free address, et cetera. I think this whole thing around working from home and this hybrid sort of environment that we're probably going to end up in as leases start to expire, as organizations start to think, hey, can I do more with less? Do I need so much real estate footprint if people are sharing, part of their focal work at home and in the workplace is, that desk, right? And being a creature of habit and going to that same desk. I think, personally, I kind of think, and I was already living this prior to COVID, right? I gave up my desk, and the file cabinet at my desk became my bag, my shoulder bag, right? And every day I would go in and I would want a different setting, and I would kind of jump from one place to another. So effectively, I was a visitor in that space. And I think there'll just be a lot more people in that same realm, and they no longer have to go to that one office, right? They may have other offices they can kind of drop in at. So things like mobility, as we all talked about, being able to provide great connections wherever I'm sitting, whether I'm actually at a desk, in some other nook or cranny of in an office, a conference room. Things like location-based services, which are things that we were already doing to be able to create more of a smart workplace, right? So if I were to walk into a conference room and have things automatically turn on, get a meeting to turn on, those are all being accelerated, not because it's something brand new. We wanted to do it already, but right now, given a lot of the health sensitivities, people want things more touchless, more automated, and it goes back to those same foundational elements that we were already investing in. So to Phil's point, some of these organizations that were already investing in them, this shouldn't be that difficult of a pivot. Whereas if we've talked to plenty of other organizations that realized they were behind and they really need to kind of leap forward, right? And they had issues from a talent perspective, from an innovation perspective. And I think for them, this is just yet another incentive, because now not only incentive, maybe a must-have or requirement to do.
Yeah, exactly. Spot on. That's what we're seeing out there as well. I got excited because it was such an amazing segue into this next slide. As an industry, we've been talking about smart and intelligent buildings since 1978. And many corporate clients globally have had a fair amount of success, in fact, a large amount of success at deploying the concepts of smart and intelligent building across the campuses that they are owner occupied in. And even many commercial real estate owners were deploying some portions of smart and intelligent building. I think we can all agree that most of those deployments had a very definable ROI. It was around saving energy, reducing carbon footprint, while maybe increasing the occupant experience. So the thinking here is, and I'm going to start with you, Phil, to see if my thinking is correct, that corporate real estate, as opposed to the traditional facility operation folks, corporate real estate as a whole, so the workplace occupancy experience folks, are being asked to create a new environment, a new occupant experience. And I suspect it's one to lower the perception of risk in the workplace, potentially lower stress, But I would also imagine, and we're starting to hear a little bit of the data that support this notion, that it's so easy at home from a technology perspective to get things to work and to make things work and to start meetings and just generally get things done. Why is it so difficult when I come to the office? I mean, and that's not necessarily, something that is difficult. I think Alan can actually provide some insight into that as well. But going back to the question for you, Phil, in the new post-COVID world, is corporate real estate being asked to sort of take that new role from an occupant experience perspective and moving the experience from the building into the workplace and start blending some of those concepts?
Yes, I think the short answer, yes. I think the jury is out on the whether or not corporate real estate is either going to be responsible for or capable of delivering the actual digital workplace experience, especially as that extends into how I, as an employee, may be like engaged digitally, but certainly exposing elements of the physical environment digitally, as Alan's talking about, like everything from kind of wayfinding and location awareness to control of my environment, or at least awareness and connectivity to how the environment is performing. Like, yes, it's really no different than software companies who have been pressed over time are like the most popular startups and technology tools that are used by them are the ones that are interoperable, right? Like making sure that you don't buy one system that is closed and you can build your own integrations or hire someone to help you do that. In most security and real estate systems, the building management system, the IWMS, were all built for obscurity in the beginning. And there wasn't the trend, as I think there's starting to be now, of interoperability and openness to say, yeah, I make the best like lighting system in the world. I make the best meeting booking system in the world. But I can talk to other systems, and basically here's the physical keys, but here's the digital key. Here's the API and how you can interact with my tools so you can build better experiences holistically for your occupants. So that gets back to like the need for having greater technical resources at real estate's disposal, both to evaluate the tools and then to do the kind of integrations that are required to make to do all the tricks that we like to see. And to your point on smart buildings, James, like will you take buildings like the Edge in Amsterdam that was all in the news a couple of years ago, first as like the most sustainable building at the time, but also one that was capable of delivering that kind of app-enabled experience. Like how great is it that I can control the lights or the HVAC, like where I'm sitting in the open, was only possible because that the developer of the building was effectively encroaching a little bit on the individual tenant's ability to have ultimate choice of their environment. So, if you want users to be able to interact with the building in a way, especially in a multi-tenanted building or shared facility, the occupier has to be okay with letting go of some of that ultimate control, so that the building's backbone is something that their individual employees can interact with, much like the employees of any other tenancy. And that too is not something that a large occupier is used to. They want to control everything, make sure the office looks and feels and smells exactly the same. So relinquishing a little bit of that maybe design authority in order for the building to be able to give the tenants better experience, or even the optionality of creating one through integrations, is new and not something that most of them are comfortable with.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'll throw out the rather controversial subject yet again, just for Alan here. On the facility side, the systems that we're talking about, the lighting control systems and the openness, it's been enabled, that notion that solution set has been enabled because building automation systems, IWMS systems are built on an IP platform that's somewhat open, and it depends on the manufacturer of those BAS systems. But it's at very least open enough to be able to allow the occupants to have some level of control and experience and interaction with the built environment. I think what's happening, Alan, and again, this is the controversial part, as those systems move more and more to be IP-based, and occupant experience is now accelerating to be able to interact with those building systems, and the ability to use those systems to increase occupant experience, there's this weird middle ground that we're in. So IT is being asked to control AV systems. IT potentially is being asked to support and enable workplace from a data systems perspective. And some of that data is siloed in IT systems, and some of that data is siloed in facility systems. But at some point, I think there has to be somewhat of a reckoning where all of these systems and data and controls comes together. And I think that's ultimately where we're headed. I think there's a few steps to get there, though. I was very intrigued with some of Aruba's latest announcements as it relates to the intelligent edge and some other items that you released related to that. But let me kind of go back to you, Alan, with a question that what do you perceive changing in the workplace from an occupant experience perspective now that we're in the mode of going back to work? Maybe it's Wi-Fi access. It's making sure that I have DAS coverage. DAS, by the way, is make sure that my cell phone works in the building. And there's some significant trends that are at work there. What are we seeing, Alan?
Yeah, as I've talked to a lot of organizations and some of the folks that are kind of really relooking at both the return to office and ultimately what the new environment, the new norm is going to look like, I think there is a very big focus on just the experience element, as we just talked about. And, one of the things I want to kind of loop back to is when you talked about the systems, I think this is where it's a little orthogonal, right? A lot of smart buildings, a lot of the technology that you see that corporate services may have invested in are often at a site level, right? So it's at a building level. It's what we had when we worked with the developer, when we gutted the buildings, a lot of these things. These are the type of systems that we actually put in. And those, for particularly the larger organizations, aren't consistent portfolio-wide, right? And because I have a different lighting system, because I have a different HVAC or BMS sort of system, I'd say, yes, they're all going IP-based and they're becoming connected. We could argue how open many of these systems are, and are they open enough for me to be able to deliver a consistent experience no matter what site that you arrive at? And I think that's where the challenge has been. And as you kind of look at how workplace technology and some of the newer technologies have been approached, you look at some of the meeting room based sort of systems or the visitor based sort of systems, they're taking more of the enterprise IT sort of path, or even throwing Wi-Fi for that matter. Organizations usually pick, a meeting room vendor, maybe a networking vendor, maybe a visitor vendor, organizational portfolio wide, right? Or maybe theater wide, let's just say. Whereas, some of these other sort of systems we talked about are now very, very site specific. So I think there's going to need to be some middle ground there. I think some of the most innovative technology solutions I've seen in the workplace space are definitely becoming a lot more cloud oriented, truly open, SDKs, et cetera, and following more of that enterprise IT sort of mindset. And then in some cases, trying to open some connectivity to pull back to some of those building systems, so some of those building systems can kind of take it for a ride there. And then probably the last thing I'll just kind of throw in, there was a mention around here, is it corporate services that's going to be kind of driving the charge with this new experience? Is it IT? Is it some other function? The interesting thing I found is that it is the workplace strategist, right? So someone similar to a role that Phil had. And one of the questions I always ask, and I get a whole variety of answers, is who do you ultimately report up to? Do you report up through the CIO chain? Is it through the corporate services CFO chain? Are you up through occasionally through the HR chain? But it's going to be that sort of function. Someone who has a keen understanding of all these different sort of buckets that is going to be most successful kind of driving the charge going forward.
Before we get to this slide for a second, just as a thought there, I think that's the role that's missing at the moment, right? From a C-suite perspective, corporate real estate perspective, it's the individual that understands and sits on top of or in between the occupant experience, the traditional facility OT, and the investments that's being made there, the transactional investment component of corporate real estate, and bringing all of that together. I think that's it. That's the piece that's missing. Another piece that's missing, as we're looking, are these two new words that's entered the lexicon of corporate real estate and workplace strategy recently: biosecurity and biosafety. Steelcase recently had some interesting statistics to come out there. I've seen some recent surveys and data that the number one top of mind for the C-suite and corporate real estate executives is sanitation technology, and I think for a lot of reasons that's true. When I start peeling the onion there a little bit, I start thinking about maybe it's related to occupant experience of the workplace and the perception that the space is safe and clean to work in. Certainly the spaces can be cleaned, but then how do you communicate the fact that they're clean? Or how do you communicate the fact that they need to be cleaned? Lots of things going on from a trends perspective, but I wanted to get a really quick view from you, Phil. Biosecurity, biosafety, have those words even entered the lexicon prior to COVID? And what does it mean today, those words?
You're on mute, Phil.
Oh yeah, you're on mute. Hang on.
There
we go. Now I got you.
Yeah, I don't think those terms specifically were in the lexicon yet. And certainly there was a trend for healthier buildings. You mentioned smart buildings, and there is a mountain of science I cannot even begin to pretend to understand in detail. But shockingly, we do better physiologically when we have access to better air and light and water and ergonomics. And newer buildings are already making like enormous strides. And I think the kind of quantified self trends of everybody wanting to better understand their own sort of health and fitness with like Fitbits and Apple Watches and everything else, we're starting to show up in the building. And it was really compelling to be able to tell someone like this environment that you're spending half of your day in is not making you less healthy. Certainly health always came up going back to like that ABW trend of moving into shared environments. It was a very easy lever to pull for someone that was resisting coming out of individual spaces to just cry wolf on like, I'm going to get more sick because I have to share desks, and maybe there's a little bit of evidence there, but not to the extent that people thought before. But I also have been reminded through a lot of conversations with former colleagues through all this that like most offices were woefully less clean like than individual employees thought, or rather that most employees dramatically overestimated the amount that an office would get cleaned. Because when you have individual assigned spaces, like most cleaning contracts are told, like, don't touch the stuff, right? So it's not as if they're wiping down every keyboard and every desk with great detail every night. And then actually one of the benefits of more shared environments and more hospitality-oriented environments, like a restaurant or hotel, is that like you see cleaning happening in a different way, right? In the office years ago, or even now, it would have been like completely verboten to have a cleaner roll through during the middle of the day. Whereas we go to really like high-end restaurant and it's completely normal and okay for someone to walk up behind you, lift up your plate in front of you, clean right out from underneath and put it right back down, because then you think it's part of the experience. So I think whether or not the words like biosafety explicitly make their way into the lexicon for most workers, like we will be more and more sensitive even after the initial kind of COVID noise like calms down, and maybe in a post-vaccine period, we will be more interested in that the environment feels serviced, which is almost by definition cleaner, with greater awareness of how that facility is performing, because like the data is there, it just hasn't been exposed to the employee that may be curious about it, and it really shouldn't be that difficult to do it given all the technologies that we've been talking about so far today.
Yeah, true, amazing. And I agree. I think it is about health and wellness. Maybe those are the words that we've been using to a certain extent, as opposed to bio something, the scary words, biosafety. Alan, you and I share some experience as it relates to technology-enabled health and wellness systems. Is there anything maybe you could add from your guys' perspective as to what's happening from a health and wellness perspective as it relates to technology or technology enablement?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so that biosafety, that's all kind of new to my vernacular as well. Outside of maybe, some clean room somewhere else in a manufacturing facility. I think it's all new to all of us. yeah, I think prior to this, as I said, this is not brand new. There was a lot of focus around wellness, right? And I think what Phil alluded to, getting natural light, can we get more oxygen in the place? Can we pump in noises, et cetera, that make people feel better? But there's definitely a pivot to health, right? And you're seeing various things where it's application based, right? Pre-checking and kind of pre-registering yourself and kind of ascertaining that you're healthy, to you're hearing a lot around whether it's camera based or thermometers, to like what Aruba is doing which is kind of providing contact tracing capabilities, right, back to the organization should there be a sick person. So now we know where that individual, who he or she socialized with, or what areas they were in. So maybe we need to do some extra enhanced cleaning in those specific sort of facilities, right? So you are seeing some pivots with technology towards kind of more of the health and safety sort of arena, which is just something that we've been generally seeing, and there's been frankly a ton of interest in.
Yep, awesome. Alan, Phil, we're gonna change gears a little bit and go into our next segment. I'm going to ask that you hang out in the green room, have a drink, grab a snack. We're going to bring you guys back in about 10 minutes or so. So thank you for that, and we'll be right back. With that, I would like to introduce a company that we ran across called Nobos. As part of our service delivery portfolio, we have something called an innovation accelerator here at Cognitive, where we bring new to market solutions or approaches to the corporate real estate world to help accelerate them, bring visibility to them, because we truly believe that they're game changers. We ran across Nobos, and I strongly feel that they're going to be a tremendous game changer for corporate real estate in the enterprise. But right now, the focus is in hospitality and hoteling. So Nate, I would ask for you to introduce yourself a little bit, and then to just give us a general background introduction into who Nobos is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks a lot, James. My name's Nate Jones. I'm one of our co-founders at Nobos. Like James mentioned, we've been in the hospitality space. So for a couple of years now, we had mainly been building procurement software. So we would help hotels, both at an individual property as well as a management company level. We would help them, kind of source different local products, be able to purchase from a management perspective and drive discounts that way, kind of centralize all the invoicing and everything like that. So, of course, a lot of the buying changed dramatically when the pandemic came along. So since about March now, we've been focusing all of our effort on tools that can help people, hotels in this example, come back into business. How can they, do what they need to do with kind of these skeleton crews running the hotels for frontline workers in some cities at the moment. And really, it's a couple of different pillars. So at a high level, our auditing software has been really great in some cases. So, if a hotel management company has a 50 or 60 page document, how do they actually, implement these changes on the grounds, and then actually, run audits from their mobile phones, take pictures and videos and provide all this documentation and kind of a real audit trail to show that things are, being rolled out successfully. And then kind of a really interesting parallel, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute here, James. I think it's, a parallel between the guest experience at a hotel and potentially the workplace experience. So a point that always comes up that, we're putting a lot of work into as well is, now that these new protocols are coming into place, being audited and trained on at the hotels, how do you actually show the guests that this is all happening? The goal being, if I'm a guest walking into your hotel, hopefully my thought is, wow, they've really going the extra mile here. And I really feel safe here, essentially.
You're absolutely right. I truly believe that there's a trend that's certainly accelerating. There were certain number of facility management companies who I would say are developing a new sort of workforce or a new service offering around hospitality. So how can you help the multiple tenants in a building that you own and are managing feel more comfortable in the space? And it very much is a parallel to what's happening in the hospitality world. Now, I'm hoping that's kind of where it ends, because if we look at some of the headlines, there's some rather negative things that are happening in the hospitality world. And I've just brought up a few of them here. one of the ones that was most telling, and it was right when we started having our discovery conversations with Nobos. The Inside Editions released this special investigation that found some very well-known hotel operators weren't really cleaning the hotel rooms. And the strange part is the management team, the ownership, really thought those rooms were being cleaned because they had a standard operating procedure. They went through the training. It was just part of the process, but there wasn't the ability to audit it. And you look at that and you see what else is happening in terms of potential litigation between the hotel workers and the hotel owners are not being able to stay safe. Maybe they didn't have the right standard operating procedures. They weren't being forced to follow them. And it becomes a scary proposition. So one of the things that excited us in the conversation is the ability to meet that gap in not just verifying training, but also looking at it from an auditing perspective. I thought that was a very interesting and very intriguing way to approach the market.
Absolutely. And just to chime in, I think, really going back to Ellen's point as well, what we're trying to provide is the consistency across an entire organization. So, it's a really fragmented industry. So management companies, then you have the brands they're operating under and franchises. So there's a lot going on. And so we want to make sure, kind of to your point, James, that, the right people who have the right incentives to look over these audits, make sure the sheets are being changed, everything that's really important, make sure they have the right visibility into being able to verify pretty easily that all these things are happening.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm certain there's more to come from you guys. Without giving a lot of the secret sauce away as to where you're headed in the world, what's next for you guys? What do you see? I mean, is enterprise a place? We've alluded to it, but is enterprise a place that could be a good fit for what you guys are doing as a pivot point?
Yeah, no, from all of our discussions, absolutely. I think from the procurement software where we started to kind of the auditing and compliance software now, kind of the strong parallel of having, I'm not sure that fragmentation is the right word in this example, but having multiple layers of kind of management, being able to oversee kind of an entire portfolio is really, maybe the core idea that we're building into. So, what that means for us is just being kind of, really easy to roll out, all cloud-based, and just making sure that everyone is, all the data is kind of safe and, kind of viewable by only the right people. So it definitely makes sense. And, I think to the first part of your question too, where are we going? Also really similar. It's kind of the idea that, like Phil and Ellen kind of said as well, it's a lot of this stuff was in place and, important coming into the pandemic. I think COVID has kind of provided a nice catalyst for all of this. So kind of moving beyond COVID audits into, brand standards, different items that are kind of done sometimes on pen and paper, sometimes a little more, manually done right now, or, all kind of the same thing moving forward.
Absolutely awesome. And I think it fits into the message that is very consistent across our research, whether it be hospitality, healthcare, learning, enterprise. Everything needs to be data driven. You need to be able to derive meaningful, purposeful insights that are tactical in order to be sure that you're able to move into a process optimization, whatever that process optimization might be. I think you guys are definitely onto something. So thank you for that. In fact, I brought you all on the screen a little bit prematurely. My apologies. It's an operator error, but we're all here. So well, I wanted to thank each of you truly for today. That was incredibly insightful. I want to go around sort of a clockwise fashion here and ask you guys for what is the thought that you would like to leave the audience that we have today. So I'm going to start with you, Nate. What's the thing that you would like everyone to take away from this?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it's what you described, James. It's, what we think is important coming out of this is, given all the processes that are in place across different management, different brands, how do we make sure that is data driven, and how do we make sure that there's a real trail of data to kind of show, what's been implemented and, prove that it's successful, really.
Thank you, Nate. Truly. Phil, sir, same question to you, big guy. What do you want to leave everybody with?
Yeah, I guess my encouragement for organizations, like as I said, to be able to consume workplace experience as a service, whether that means like greater access to flexible pools of space, use of co-working, or giving people autonomy to work from home or come into the office or halfway to the office and where to sit in the office. You have to give up a little bit of control. And of all the things that are shown to be so important to everyone for their productivity and connection now, I don't think personally that what people are missing is an office that feels and looks and smells exactly like every other office in the portfolio and has been controlled down to absolutely every little minutia. Especially for me, like working at home for months or lots of people working from home in months, like the idea of any functional, clean, experiential, ergonomically sound like workplace where I can get together with people from my corporate community, my project team and others is enough. So in order to allow your real estate portfolio to move as quickly as you want your business to be, you have to get into and out of those spaces quickly, which just means relaxing that assumption that everything has to follow the 100-page design and construction guidelines that we had years ago. Good space is accessible now quickly and better to move in fast and like learn from it through the data that we've talked about, as opposed to trying to get it perfect over the course of a year, only to find out that it's not almost immediately, which is almost always the case.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. Truly, truly, truly. Very much appreciated and incredibly insightful stuff. Back over to you, Alan. Same question, sir. The thought you'd like to leave this audience with?
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I think all the panelists here all agree that in this new age that we're going through, these use cases aren't terribly new. It's just a slight pivot to a lot of the foundational sort of investments that many organizations have been made. I think the one piece of advice I'd kind of leave with the audience here is that whether you're an advanced organization that have already embarked on this path or you're kind of behind and playing catch up, don't be looking for solutions that are one trick ponies just for a specific sort of COVID solution. Really look at the actual investments. Does it have the foundational technologies so that once we kind of get past this period, we could repurpose that infrastructure to drive the much broader sort of agenda, right? Which is a much more agile, a much more experiential sort of space that works for the organization, right? And whether that organization is now going to be kind of hybrid and going to be partially work from home, partially in the office, will it support what we're trying to do, which is that kind of more seamless experience as I transform, as we say, from edge to office, right? And back. Will these investments, be applicable in that space? Because I mean, we've been looking at a lot of the technologies, and part of the reason why we kind of went into this is that there's a lot of technologies that are looking for a lot of that dollar that maybe the organization only has, and they only have $1 to spend. So you better make sure, particularly in this environment, if you're spending that dollar or a portion of that dollar on some sort of technology, we could repurpose that. And it's not only something that lasts for 6, 9, or 18 months, right? But we'll be able to milk that for, whatever we want to depreciate it over a time period, 3, 5 years, et cetera. So that's what I would leave with the audience here.
That's awesome. And it's a very key point. In fact, I'll double up on it, that the investments that you make today need to live into the future. So know your destination and make sure you're moving in the right direction to get there. Thank you, Alan, truly, for your time and incredible insights there. Just a little bit of house cleaning for me that's left. We are. First, let me say thank you to everyone, and let me thank you guys again for joining us live, and for those of you watching the recording. I'm hopeful that you found it very valuable. Always looking for insights into our show. Questions and comments, we're happy to answer any and all that may come. You can find me on LinkedIn. In fact, that's a QR code. Let me pull it up a little bigger here. When you put that into your phone or the LinkedIn app, it will take you directly to my LinkedIn page. From there, you can get a little more information on who we are and what we do, and I can help connect you to the speakers that you've had here, or really any speaker that we've had in the past. At the end of the day, Cognitive Corporation is a professional services firm that helps connect corporate real estate, workplace strategy, facilities, C-suite business units with the types of technology that we've seen here. And it's an extraordinary change management function. It's a little bit changed in that, it's a lot changed, in fact, in that we now have to look at policies and procedures as it relates to data sharing, and HR needs to be involved, but we can get there. And ultimately, it's bringing that automated intelligence, the technology-enabled health and wellness systems and solutions, all in a way that fits where the companies are today, where you as a company are today, where you want your corporate culture to be, and we help ensure that that's an investment that lives long into the future, and it's not just a single investment. I will say from Nobos' perspective, you can certainly look for more webinars where it goes deep into the technology and how it's applied from a hospitality perspective, and I'm sure there'll be many more interesting iterative releases of that as we move forward. Alan, I know from Aruba's perspective, you have some extraordinary solutions that you're talking about in market right now that will help from an occupant experience perspective. And Phil, your incredible experience in the marketplace and being able to help corporate real estate executives like you better understand what's happening today in their world, as well as how technology enables that, is really second to none. So I thank you guys truly across the board. And with that, I will end our webcast just slightly over an hour. Thank you, everyone, truly.